Hello there. I recently looked at some New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs and I deliberately tried to select wines from outside Marlborough so that we could see the different styles that New Zealand's regions gave to the grape variety. One of the producers whose wines I looked at, Misha Wilkinson, was interested by some comments I'd made about the wine aging and asked me if I'd like to try a mature version of that. So I've got here, thanks to Misha, the Starlet, but this is the 2011 Sauvignon Blanc. So this is a Sauvignon Blanc from Central Otago, from the Bendigo sub-region of Central Otago, and from quite early on in the production of this particular wine. Now I spoke at that time about the fact that Andy and Misha Wilkinson had come back from working in Asia. Andy in fact had come back, he was a New Zealander, Misha is an Australian. And in 2004 they bought and they established Misha's vineyard here in the newly developing Bendigo sub-region of Central Otago. So the vineyards here are on the south side of Lake Dunstan. They face northeast, they're terraces of fractured stone in place. Actually, some of the soil is made up of the diggings from old gold mines dating back to the 1860s when there was a gold rush in Bendigo. So these are described as sun-drenched, northwest facing terraces. The Sauvignon Blanc is from a single vineyard. The vineyard is known as the ski slope. It sits at between 240 and 270 metres above sea level, so there's a cooling influence from the altitude involved here, as well as the cooling influence of nearby Lake Dunstan. The vineyard was planted in 2005, and the vines used are described as a Massal selection clone. So presumably a selection from a renowned vineyard. They don't detail which, but picking out of the best Sauvignon vines there to propagate. Misha also pointed out to me that I haven't actually in my video explained why the wine was called the Starlet, and I think it's good to know. The name relates to Misha's upbringing. In fact, her father died when she was 2 and she was brought up by her mother, who was an opera singer. So she was very familiar with spending time backstage at the opera in Melbourne, in dressing rooms, and meeting show business personalities. She herself had hoped for a career as a ballerina, but in fact had grown too tall. So maybe the name the Starlet actually reflects some of Misha's unfulfilled dreams. What she says, however, though, is that Sauvignon Blanc as a variety is generally thought to show most of its attractiveness when it's vivacious and youthful. She did also point out that she felt that these days maybe it wasn't such a politically correct name to use, but maybe it's a bit late to change it now. So anyway, hopefully our tasting will give you some insight into how the variety ages. The growing season that led up to the 2011 vintage started warm and settled, but then in December it became damp, relatively cool, quite windy. So what this meant was that fruit set and flowering occurred under good conditions and happened consistently. From December onwards, however, canopy management was important to maintain an open canopy to prevent disease issues of the vine. In the run-up to harvest, the weather settled again into its normal routine of warm days and cool evenings, allowing the fruit to finish ripening, but yet at the same time the cool of the evenings enabling it to maintain its freshness. The result is some lovely, characterful Sauvignon Blanc fruit. The wine was entirely hand harvested. It's quite a steep slope, it's not somewhere you get a mechanical harvester. Picking went on between the 7th and the 12th of April. At the winery, the fruit was whole bunch pressed. What that means is rather than distemming the fruit, you leave the bunches there, and actually that helps the juice to drain through the fruit and tends to give a cleaner juice. Now the free run juice and the first pressings were put into stainless steel tanks to ferment, and the later pressings, comprising 11% of all the juice, went into old oak barrels, and there, instead of being inoculated, as had happened in the stainless steel, the juice was allowed to ferment using the indigenous yeasts on the fruit or that were already in the winery. So you have the majority of the wine fermenting at cool temperature with cultured yeasts in stainless steel tanks, so giving clean, straightforward, perfumed aromatics. But the remaining 11% fermented a little bit warmer, and those indigenous yeasts will have introduced some additional flavours to the ferment. So these two portions were blended to give the wine more complexity, to add some structure, and hopefully give the wine many of the elements it needed to age. I'm not told how the wine aged. A portion of it may have aged on its lees, which would have helped to add some richness, but the wine was finally bottled on the 4th of October 2011. So this is going to be very interesting to look at. Let's see what we make of it. First thing I would say is that even given the fact that this is a relatively elderly white wine, that is quite a clear, bright, pale yellow colour. There are almost greenish hints. Swelling it, the wine has 13.5% alcohol. It's slowly forming gentle tears on the side of the glass there, but they're not substantial. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are intense, there's a pungency to them, and it combines a number of elements. You've got sort of quite greenish notes, pea pods, asparagus, an underlying note of passion fruit. You've got creamy notes, and then over the top of that there's a complexity that's coming from that indigenous fermentation, because you've got sort of notes of gunpowder, whetstones, those sort of sulphur-derived mineral notes. It's almost a sort of a toastiness to it. It's not necessarily an aroma of oak, but it's an oak-influenced aroma, as if there was a tiny touch of vanilla there. Something about the pungency, there's almost the slightest hint of cattiness as well to this. There aren't necessarily the unripe notes, so typical of some Sauvignon Blancs. So I'm not smelling nettles, I'm not smelling gooseberries, I'm not smelling cut grass. Those methoxy notes aren't in this particular wine. So let's have a taste. The wine is dry. There's some really intense flavour. It's that combination of green fruits, passion fruits, so asparagus and pea pod as the green fruits. The minerality very much to the fore, sort of drying whetstone. There's that sort of catty pungency coming through slightly more. There are slightly honeyed notes. The fruit has a richness and a roundness. There's a texture as well as a slight tannic note there, which makes me think slightly of pear skins. When there's very ripe pear and you bite in through the skin, you get that sort of tannic texture. I think this is a wine that's probably fully mature. I don't think there's a hurry to drink it up, but I suspect that those bitter tannins, the minerally notes and the pungency will actually start to take over from the fruit as that starts to fade. At the moment, the fruit is rich, it's almost slightly oily and unctuous. The wine's showing texture, it's showing complexity. There's a lovely length to the flavours. The acidity is sufficient to ensure there's a freshness that gives good balance, allowing the green asparagus notes and then the passion fruit notes to linger on the finish really quite well. I think this is a really interesting wine. Certainly I think it's got structure, it's sort of medium-bodied style. Doesn't seem to have suffered from aging. I think it's fair to say that it will have aged in the best place possible, the producer's cellar. Now this had a Wine Searcher aggregated score of 91 out of 100. I'm assuming that's a score given at the time of release. I think the fact that the wine has managed to age successfully for 13 years suggests to me that possibly it might have been worth slightly more, 92 or 93. Certainly it's a wine that's been able to develop in the bottle, and to me it does show that there are styles of Sauvignon Blanc that are quite capable of aging, at least in the short to medium term. So I hope you found this interesting. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please press the like button, we'd really appreciate that. If you have any comments you want to make, please pop those in the comments box. We'd love to hear your views, what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else related to that. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine. I strongly suspect it will be impossible to get hold of. However, that same page will also link you to other vintages of the same wine that you might find of interest. And those pages we've tried to fill with information about the region, the grape variety, the producer, the wine's pricing over the years, what the critics have thought of it, what other users have thought of it, and a comparison between all the vintages. So hopefully there's plenty of information there for you if you want to buy the wine to make an informed choice about buying it. So I'd like to say thank you to Misha Wilkinson for sending me this wine to try. I found this incredibly interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope that you'll take some time and come and join us again for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.